The harsh summer sun beat down on the dusty streets of El Paso, Texas, in 1872, as Zoe Garrett clutched the worn leather reins of her family's last horse. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, carving clean trails through the dust as she hurried away from the auction block, her shoulders shaking with each desperate sob. The animal sale had been her final hope, the last desperate attempt to save the small ranch that had been her home for all 22 years of her life. Zoe's legs trembled beneath her as she moved through the crowd, barely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk who'd witnessed her family's steady decline since her father's death 3 months prior. The debts had piled up faster than she could manage, and today's meager earnings from selling their prized stallion would hardly make a dent in what they owed. Tomorrow, the bank would take everything else. The saloon stood at the end of the street, its swinging doors beckoning with promises of momentary escape. Zoe rarely set foot in such establishments, but today she needed somewhere dark to gather herself before facing her mother with the news. She pushed through the doors, keeping her head down as she moved to a small table in the corner, away from the card games and boisterous drinkers. A glass of amber liquid appeared before her, startling her from her thoughts. She looked up into the weathered face of the barkeep. "On the house, Miss Garrett," he said quietly before retreating to his post, leaving her alone with the whiskey and her misery. Zoe didn't touch the drink. She simply sat, fingers twisting the handkerchief in her lap as fresh tears threatened. When she finally looked up again, her seat across the table was occupied by a tall man with broad shoulders and a worn leather vest. She recognized him as one of the buyers from the auction, though he hadn't bid on her horse. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat respectfully, "I hope you don't mind my saying, but you look like you could use some company." His voice was deep and gentle, nothing like the rough tones of most men who frequented the saloon. When Zoe didn't respond, he stood up and gestured to the chair next to him. "Sit with me," he offered, moving his own position so they could both look out at the room rather than directly at each other, a kindness she appreciated as she tried to hide her tears. "I don't need charity, mister," Zoe managed to say, though her voice caught on the last word. The man shook his head, not offering charity, just a friendly ear. He extended his hand. "Thomas Murphy. Most folks call me Thorn." Hesitantly, Zoe took his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Zoe Garrett," she replied, though she suspected he already knew who she was. Everyone in El Paso knew the sad story of William Garrett's daughter struggling to keep his ranch after the consumption took him. "I know who you are, Miss Garrett," Thorn confirmed. "I've admired your determination these past months. Not many would fight so hard." "Fat lot of good it did," she muttered bitterly, finally reaching for the whiskey and taking a small sip that burned all the way down. "By this time tomorrow, I'll have nothing but the clothes on my back." Thorn was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes contemplative as they studied the other patrons. "Maybe," he finally said, "or maybe there's another way." "I've tried every way there is," Zoe replied, the defeat evident in her voice. "The bank wants their money and I don't have it. Simple as that." "How much do you need?" Thorn asked directly. Zoe laughed, a hollow sound without humor. "More than I could earn in 2 years of honest work. $340. She named the sum that had seemed insurmountable for months now, the figure that haunted her dreams. Thorn nodded thoughtfully. "That's a considerable sum." "Which is why I'll be packing our things tonight," Zoe said, rising from her chair. "Thank you for the company, Mr. Murphy, but I should go. My mother will be waiting." "Wait," Thorn said, standing as well. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Garrett." Something in his tone made her pause. "I'm not interested in the kind of propositions men usually make in saloons, Mr. Murphy." A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Nothing improper, I assure you. I own a cattle operation north of here. Been looking to expand. Your land adjoins mine on the eastern boundary." Zoe's eyes narrowed. "So you want to buy our land for pennies on the dollar? Get in line behind the bank." "No," Thorn said evenly. "I want to pay off your debt and take you on as a partner. Your father knew ranching better than most, and I imagine he passed that knowledge to you. I need someone who knows that section of land, and I'm willing to bet you need a fresh start." Zoe stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate hope. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I knew your father," Thorn replied. "He helped me when I first came to Texas. Said if I ever needed anything, his door was open. Now I'm returning the favor to his daughter." "Partners," Zoe repeated the word slowly. "Not workers, not tenants, equal partners in the operation of that section," Thorn confirmed. "You and your mother stay in your home, I pay the debt. You help run the combined properties. We split the profits after expenses." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. "And what exactly would you expect from this partnership, Mr. Murphy?" "Hard work, honesty, and your knowledge of that land," he said simply. "Nothing more." Zoe studied him carefully. Thorn Murphy was known in El Paso as a fair businessman, though somewhat of a loner. He'd arrived 5 years ago, bought land, and built a respectable operation through sheer determination. There were no rumors of dishonesty or cruelty attached to his name. "I need to discuss this with my mother," she finally said. Thorn nodded. "Of course, I'll be at the bank tomorrow morning at 9. If you're interested, meet me there. If not," he shrugged. "No hard feelings." As Zoe walked home, the sun setting behind the mountains in a blaze of orange and red, she considered Thorn Murphy's offer. It could be salvation or just another trap. Either way, it was the only chance she had left. Martha Garrett listened in silence as her daughter explained the proposition, her weathered hands continuing to mend a worn shirt by lamplight. At 52, Martha had buried a husband and 2 sons, leaving only Zoe to face the world with. "What does your instinct tell you about this man?" Martha finally asked, setting aside her mending. Zoe considered the question. "He seems honest, direct, not the kind to offer something without meaning it." "But you're suspicious of his motives," Martha observed. "Wouldn't you be?" Zoe countered. "Men don't just offer to save women from financial ruin out of the goodness of their hearts." Martha smiled faintly. "Some do. Your father would have." "Father is gone," Zoe said, more sharply than she intended. She immediately regretted it when she saw the flash of pain cross her mother's face. "I'm sorry, Mother. I'm just afraid of making another mistake. We can't afford one more." Martha reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Then we'll pray for guidance tonight, and tomorrow you'll know what to do." Morning came with no divine revelation, but Zoe found herself walking toward the bank anyway, her best dress brushed clean and her hair neatly pinned beneath her bonnet. Her mother had insisted she look presentable, whatever her decision might be. Thorn Murphy was already there, his tall figure distinctive as he stood on the boardwalk outside the bank. He wore a clean shirt beneath his vest today, and his dark hair was combed back from his forehead, revealing a small scar above his right eyebrow. "Miss Garrett," he greeted her, tipping his hat. "Have you considered my offer?" "I have," Zoe said, lifting her chin, "and I have some conditions of my own." A hint of surprise crossed Thorn's face, followed by what looked like respect. "I'm listening." "First, we draw up legal papers. A proper contract that protects my mother and me if something happens to you or if you change your mind." Thorn nodded. "Reasonable. What else?" "Second, I want to learn everything about your operation. If we're partners, I won't be kept in the dark about any aspect of the business." "Agreed," Thorn said without hesitation. "Third," Zoe continued, My mother and I maintain complete independence regarding our household. Our home remains ours in every sense of the word." Thorn's expression remained serious. "I would expect nothing less, Miss Garrett. Are there other conditions?" Zoe took a deep breath. "Last one. If at any point I feel this arrangement isn't working, I can buy out your investment in our property with interest and end the partnership." This time Thorn did smile, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Garrett." "Your father would be proud." He extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" After a moment's hesitation, Zoe shook his hand firmly. "We have a deal, Mr. Murphy. Shall we inform the bank?" 30 minutes later, Zoe stood in stunned silence as the bank manager filed away the receipt for payment in full. Thorn Murphy had just handed over $340 without batting an eye, as casually as most men might purchase a drink. "The deed remains in the Garrett name," Thorn had insisted to the manager. "I'm simply settling their account." Outside the bank, Zoe found her voice again. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Murphy." "Thorn," he corrected gently. "And there's no need for thanks. This is business." He glanced up at the sun. "I should head back to my ranch. There's work waiting. Perhaps you and your mother would join me for supper tomorrow. We can discuss how to combine our operations most effectively." Zoe nodded, still dazed by the morning's events. "We'll be there." As Thorn mounted his horse, he looked down at her with those serious blue eyes. "Miss Garrett, I hope you know I meant what I said. This is a business arrangement. I expect nothing beyond your expertise and hard work." "I understand," Zoe replied, finding herself believing him. "And you'll get both. I promise you that." The Murphy ranch was larger than Zoe had imagined, with a sturdy 2-story main house, a bunkhouse for the hands, and well-maintained corrals and barns. As she and her mother approached in their wagon the following evening, Zoe noted the orderly operations, the healthy cattle in the nearby pastures, and the general air of prosperity that hung over the place. Thorn greeted them at the door himself, having evidently sent his ranch hands elsewhere for the evening to give them privacy for their discussion. Inside, the house was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large table set for dinner in the main room. "Ladies," Thorn said, helping Martha from the wagon with gentle hands, "welcome to Triple M Ranch." "Triple M?" Zoe questioned as she climbed down unassisted. "Murphy, Montana, and memories," Thorn explained with a slight smile. "The 3 things that brought me here." Over a surprisingly well-prepared meal of beef roast, potatoes, and fresh bread, Thorn outlined his vision for their combined properties. He had maps spread on a side table, showing how the water access would improve with their joined lands, and how rotating the cattle between the different pastures would benefit both soil and beasts. "Your father's innovation with the irrigation ditches on the north section was brilliant," Thorn told Zoe. "I'd like to expand that system across both properties." "That was actually my idea," Zoe said quietly. "Father implemented it, but the design was mine." Thorn's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Then I'm even more confident in our partnership. That kind of thinking is exactly what I need." Martha watched the exchange with thoughtful eyes, saying little but observing much. As the evening progressed, Zoe found herself relaxing in Thorn's company, impressed by his knowledge and his willingness to listen to her ideas. There was none of the condescension she'd often encountered from men when discussing ranching matters. As they were preparing to leave, Thorn handed Zoe a small ledger. "This contains all the financial information for my operation: profits, losses, expenses, investments, everything you need to understand our starting point." Zoe took the book, surprised by his transparency. "Thank you for trusting me with this. Partners need trust," Thorn said simply. I'll ride over tomorrow to help with anything you need at your place." On the ride home, Martha finally broke her contemplative silence. "He's a good man, I think," Zoe nodded slowly. "I think so too. But I still don't understand why he's doing this." "Sometimes people surprise us, Zoe," Martha said softly. "Not everyone has ulterior motives." The following weeks proved Martha's assessment accurate. Thorn was as good as his word, arriving early most mornings to help with repairs to the Garrett ranch that had been neglected during their financial struggles. He brought two of his hands to assist with rebuilding the corral and fixing the roof of the barn, but never once did he try to take over or diminish Zoe's authority on her land. For her part, Zoe threw herself into learning everything about Thorn's operation. She studied his ledger carefully, rode the boundaries of his property with him, and met his small crew of loyal ranch hands. She noted how they respected him without fear, a rare quality in a boss in these parts. One evening, as they sat on the Garrett's porch after a long day of work, Zoe finally asked the question that had been nagging at her for weeks. "Why didn't you just buy our land when the bank foreclosed? It would have been cheaper than paying our debt." Thorn was silent for a long moment, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," he finally said. 10 years ago in Montana, I had a small ranch. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. A hard winter and some bad luck with rustlers put me in debt. The bank took it all without blinking." He turned to look at her, his expression open in a way it rarely was. "I swore if I ever had the means to prevent that happening to someone else, I would." "Is that why you came to Texas?" Zoe asked softly. Thorn nodded. "Your father found me working as a hired gun for a cattle drive. I was angry, bitter. He talked some sense into me, convinced me that starting over wasn't the same as giving up." A small smile touched his lips. "He even loaned me enough to make a down payment on my first parcel here." Zoe stared at him in shock. "He never mentioned that." "He made me promise not to tell anyone. Said a man's pride is sometimes all he has, and he shouldn't have to acknowledge needing help." Thorn shrugged. "I paid him back within a year with interest. He used that money to buy your mother that blue dress she wears to church." The revelation brought tears to Zoe's eyes. It was so like her father to help someone quietly, expecting nothing in return. And now, his kindness had come full circle to save his daughter when she needed it most. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. Thorn simply nodded, his eyes returning to the sunset. They sat in companionable silence until the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. As summer turned to fall, the partnership flourished beyond either of their expectations. The combined herds were healthier with access to more varied grazing land, and Zoe's innovative irrigation systems expanded across both properties, ensuring green pastures even as other ranches struggled with the dry season. Zoe found herself looking forward to Thorn's visits, enjoying their long discussions about the future of the ranch and their easy companionship as they worked side by side. He never treated her as less capable because she was a woman, instead valuing her opinions and often deferring to her judgment on matters she knew better. For his part, Thorn seemed to relax more in her company, occasionally sharing stories from his past, or even laughing at her dry observations about the townspeople of El Paso. The serious, reserved man she'd first met was still there, but alongside him emerged someone with depth, intelligence, and even a sense of humor. Martha watched the developing friendship with knowing eyes but said nothing, content to see her daughter engaged and passionate about life again after the dark months following William's death. The first real test of their partnership came in late October when a band of cattle rustlers hit the northern boundary of Thorn's property, making off with nearly 30 head. Zoe was at the Garrett ranch when one of Thorn's hands rode in with the news. Without hesitation, she saddled her horse and rode with the hand back to the Triple M, finding Thorn already organizing a pursuit party. "You're staying here," he told her firmly when she dismounted. Zoe's eyes narrowed. "Like hell I am. Those cattle belong to both of us now." "It's too dangerous," Thorn insisted, checking his rifle. "These men aren't playing games." "Neither am I," Zoe retorted, retrieving her father's old Winchester from her saddle holster. "I can track as well as any man here, and I'm a better shot than most. You need every capable rider." Thorn looked like he wanted to argue further, but the determination in her eyes must have convinced him. "Stay close to me," he finally conceded, "and follow my lead if there's trouble." The tracking party set out immediately, following the clear trail left by the stolen cattle. Zoe rode beside Thorn, her eyes scanning the ground for signs while her mind raced with possibilities. The rustlers would need to cross the river to reach Mexico, where they could sell the cattle without questions. There were only 3 fordable crossings within a day's ride. "They're heading for Diablo Crossing," she said after studying the direction of travel. "It's the only place deep enough to hide their trail but shallow enough to get the cattle across." Thorn glanced at her with new respect. "You're sure?" "My father and I chased rustlers plenty of times," Zoe replied grimly. "There's a shortcut through the canyon that could put us ahead of them." Without questioning her further, Thorn signaled the men to follow as Zoe led them off the main trail and into a narrow ravine that cut through the rocky terrain. The passage was tight in places, forcing them to ride single file, but it shaved valuable time off their pursuit. As they emerged from the canyon within sight of Diablo Crossing, Zoe's prediction proved accurate. The rustlers were just beginning to move the stolen cattle into the water when Thorn's party appeared on the ridge above them. "Hold it right there," Thorn's voice rang out, his rifle raised. The rustlers reacted instantly, drawing weapons and firing toward the ridge. The air filled with gunfire as Thorn's men returned fire, forcing the thieves to take cover behind rocks near the riverbank. "Stay down," Thorn ordered Zoe as they dismounted behind a large boulder. But instead of cowering, Zoe moved to the edge of their cover, her Winchester steady in her hands. When one of the rustlers broke from his position to make a run for his horse, Zoe took careful aim and fired. The man yelled in pain as the bullet struck his shoulder, sending him tumbling to the ground. "Told you I was a good shot," Zoe said calmly as Thorn stared at her. The firefight was brief but intense. 2 of the rustlers surrendered after Zoe's shot demonstrated the precariousness of their position. A 3rd was wounded by one of Thorn's men, and the 4th managed to escape on horseback, though without any cattle to show for his trouble. As they rounded up the stolen herd and secured the captured rustlers, Thorn pulled Zoe aside. "That was either the bravest or the most foolhardy thing I've ever seen a woman do," he said, his voice tight with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Is that different from what you'd say to a man?" Zoe challenged. Thorn's expression softened unexpectedly. "No," he admitted. "I'd call any man who did what you just did either brave or foolish too." He shook his head. I don't know what I would have done if something had happened to you." The concern in his voice caught Zoe off guard, sending an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Well, nothing did happen," she said, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "And we got the cattle back. I'd call that a good day's work." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, with Thorn staying close to Zoe's side as they herded the recovered cattle. The captured rustlers rode ahead, hands bound, guarded by 2 of Thorn's most trusted men who would deliver them to the sheriff in El Paso. That evening, after the excitement had died down and the ranch returned to normal operations, Thorn insisted on escorting Zoe home personally. "You don't need to do this," she told him as they rode through the gathering dusk. "I know the way blindfolded." "Humor me," Thorn replied. "It's been an eventful day." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clop of hooves and the occasional night bird calling. When they were almost to the Garrett ranch, Thorn finally spoke again. "I've never met anyone like you, Zoe Garrett," he said quietly. "Most women would have fallen apart after losing their father and facing financial ruin, but you fought, and today you fought again without hesitation." "I do what needs doing," Zoe said simply. "My father taught me that." "It's more than that," Thorn insisted. "It's courage, real courage." The sincerity in his voice made Zoe glance over at him, catching the admiration in his eyes before he looked away. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of feelings that went beyond their business arrangement or even friendship. Martha was waiting on the porch when they arrived, having heard about the rustlers from one of the hands who'd stopped by earlier. She embraced her daughter tightly, then surprised Thorn by hugging him as well. "Thank you for bringing her home safely," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. "Actually, Mother," Zoe said with a small smile, "I think I helped bring us all home safely today." Later, as Zoe prepared for bed, she found herself replaying the events of the day, not the danger or the gunfight, but the look in Thorn's eyes when he'd feared for her safety. No man had ever looked at her that way before, with a mixture of admiration, concern, and something deeper that made her heart race just remembering it. As winter settled over El Paso, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow to the desert landscape, the partnership between Zoe and Thorn continued to strengthen. What began as a business arrangement had evolved into genuine friendship, and now seemed to be shifting toward something more, though neither of them had spoken of it directly. Thorn joined the Garretts for Sunday dinners after church, bringing small gifts for Martha, fresh coffee beans or lemon drops, her favorite treat, and discussing books with Zoe, having discovered their shared love of reading. He'd begun lending her volumes from his surprisingly extensive library, eagerly awaiting her thoughts on each one. For Thanksgiving, he insisted on hosting both women at his home, revealing an unexpected talent for cooking that he attributed to years of bachelor living. The meal was memorable not for its extravagance but for the warmth and laughter that filled the usually quiet house. "I've never seen you smile so much," Martha commented as they drove home that evening. "It suits you." Zoe flushed but didn't deny it. "He's easy to talk to, easier than most men." "He respects you," Martha observed. "As your father respected me. It's a rare quality." As Christmas approached, the entire town of El Paso prepared for the holiday with decorations and festivities. The annual Christmas dance was the social event of the season, bringing together ranchers, townsfolk, and even visitors from outlying areas for an evening of celebration. Zoe had avoided the dance the previous year, still deep in mourning for her father. This year, however, Martha insisted they attend. "Life is for the living, dear," she told Zoe firmly. "Your father would want you to dance." The night of the dance arrived with clear skies and unseasonably mild weather. Zoe wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. Martha had helped her arrange her chestnut hair in an elegant style, with a few curls framing her face. When they arrived at the town hall, the celebration was already underway. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the wooden floor where couples twirled to the lively music provided by a small band of local musicians. Zoe's eyes scanned the room automatically, looking for one particular tall figure. When she didn't immediately see Thorn, she felt a stab of disappointment she hadn't expected. "He'll be here," Martha said knowingly, patting her daughter's arm. "A man doesn't bring a woman fancy chocolates from San Antonio unless he intends to dance with her at Christmas." Zoe was about to protest when the door opened, and Thorn walked in. He'd clearly made an effort for the occasion, wearing a clean black suit with a string tie and his boots polished to a shine. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard, giving him a distinguished appearance that drew appreciative glances from several unmarried women in the room. But his eyes found Zoe immediately, and the smile that spread across his face was for her alone. He made his way through the crowd toward them, nodding politely to acquaintances but never slowing his purposeful stride. "Miss Garrett," he greeted her formally, though his eyes were warm. "Mrs. Garrett, you both look lovely this evening." "You clean up nicely yourself, Mr. Murphy," Martha replied with a smile. "I hardly recognized you without dust on your boots." Thorn laughed, a rich sound that Zoe had come to treasure in recent months. "Special occasions call for clean boots, madam." He turned to Zoe, extending his hand. "Would you do me the honor of a dance, Miss Garrett?" Zoe placed her hand in his, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at his touch. "I should warn you, I'm out of practice." "That makes two of us," Thorn admitted as he led her to the dance floor. "The cattle don't make very good dance partners." As they joined the other couples, Thorn's arm slipped around her waist, strong and secure as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. Despite his claimed lack of practice, he moved with natural grace, never missing a beat of the music. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Murphy," Zoe said as they turned smoothly around the floor. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper dancing," Thorn replied. "Said no Murphy boy would embarrass her at social gatherings." "You've never mentioned your family before," Zoe observed. A shadow crossed Thorn's face briefly. "They're all gone now. My parents died of fever when I was 19. My older brother was killed at Shiloh during the war." "I'm sorry," Zoe said softly, understanding the pain of such losses. Thorn's expression cleared as he looked down at her. "Tonight isn't for sad memories, it's for making new ones." His arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Better ones." They danced 3 songs together before propriety demanded Thorn ask other ladies to dance, though his eyes continued to find Zoe throughout the evening. She accepted a few dances with other men from town, including the banker who had once threatened to take her home, and now treated her with newfound respect since her partnership with Thorn had become common knowledge. Later in the evening, as the band played a slower melody, Thorn found her again. "One more dance before I take you and your mother home," Zoe nodded, allowing him to lead her back to the floor. This time, his hand on her waist seemed to burn through the fabric of her dress, and she was acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. "You know people are talking about us," she said quietly as they moved to the music. "People always talk," Thorn replied unconcernedly. "Does it bother you?" Zoe considered the question. "Not the way it should, perhaps." Thorn's blue eyes searched her face. "And what does that mean, Miss Garrett?" "It means," Zoe said, gathering her courage, "that I find I don't mind if people think there's more between us than a business arrangement." The dance ended before Thorn could respond, but his hand lingered on hers as they walked off the floor, his thumb tracing small circles on her palm that sent shivers up her arm. The ride home was quiet, Martha dozing in the back of Thorn's buggy while Zoe sat beside him in the front seat, a blanket shared across their laps against the night chill. When they reached the Garrett ranch, Thorn helped Martha inside before returning to assist Zoe. Instead of immediately releasing her hand after she stepped down from the buggy, he held it gently between both of his. "I'd like to call on you properly, Zoe," he said quietly. "Not as a business partner, as a suitor if you'd permit it." Zoe felt her heart skip a beat. "I thought you weren't expecting anything beyond my expertise and hard work," she reminded him of his words from months ago. "I wasn't expecting to care for you the way I do," Thorn admitted, "but some things can't be planned or predicted." In the silver moonlight, his eyes were earnest and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Zoe found herself nodding before she could overthink her response. "I'd like that, Thorn." His smile was brilliant, transforming his face completely. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Merry Christmas, Zoe Garrett." "Merry Christmas, Thorn Murphy," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As January brought colder weather to El Paso, Thorn's courtship of Zoe proceeded with the same thoughtful intentionality he brought to all aspects of his life. He called on her regularly, always bringing a small token of his affection, a book he thought she'd enjoy, wildflowers he'd gathered on his ride over, or once, a beautiful hand-carved wooden box he'd made himself during the long winter evenings. Their conversations deepened as they shared more of themselves with each other. Zoe told him about growing up as the only girl among 3 brothers, all now gone, 2 to illness as children, and 1 to an accident on a cattle drive. Thorn spoke of his time fighting in the war, the horrors he'd seen, and his determination to build something peaceful and lasting afterward. Their partnership continued to flourish alongside their courtship. By combining their knowledge and resources, they weathered the winter with minimal livestock losses, and even managed to secure a favorable contract with the Army to supply beef to the nearby fort in the spring. One crisp February afternoon, Thorn suggested a ride to the mesa that formed the highest point on their combined properties. Zoe readily agreed, enjoying any opportunity to escape the confines of indoor winter activities. They rode side by side, their horses picking their way carefully up the rocky trail that led to the summit. When they reached the top, Zoe gasped at the view. Miles of their land spread out below them, the distant mountains sharp against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful," she said, dismounting to stand at the edge, the wind tugging at her hair. "I come here to think," Thorn told her, joining her at the viewpoint, "to remind myself how far I've come from those dark days after losing my first ranch." He turned to face her. "I never thought I'd have this again: land, purpose, hope for the future." "You've built something remarkable," Zoe said sincerely. "We have," Thorn corrected gently. "What we've accomplished together in 6 months is more than I managed alone in 5 years." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small object, keeping it concealed in his palm. "Zoe, when I offered you that partnership in the saloon, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. I thought I was helping William Garrett's daughter out of a sense of obligation. Instead, I found a woman of extraordinary strength, intelligence, and beauty who has become essential to me in every way." Zoe's heart began to race as Thorn dropped to one knee before her, opening his hand to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small diamond that caught the winter sunlight. "I know it hasn't been that long," he continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Zoe Garrett. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Zoe's eyes, blurring her vision as emotion welled up inside her. 6 months ago, she'd been at the lowest point of her life, certain she had lost everything. Now, kneeling before her was a man who had not only saved her home, but had shown her that life could hold joy and promise again. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Thorn Murphy, I will marry you." His face lit up with a joy that matched her own as he slipped the ring onto her finger. When he stood, Zoe didn't wait for him to make the first move. She wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him down for a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't: her gratitude, her happiness, and most of all, her love for this quiet, honorable man who had changed her life. Thorn's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you'd say it was too soon," he admitted. Zoe smiled up at him. "Life's too uncertain to waste time when you know what you want." She kissed him again, briefly. "And I want you, Thorn Murphy. I want the life we can build together." Martha was overjoyed when they returned to share their news, embracing Thorn and welcoming him officially to the family. "William would have approved," she told him, tears in her eyes. "He always said Zoe needed someone who could match her spirit, not tame it." "I wouldn't dream of trying to tame her," Thorn replied, his arm around Zoe's waist. "Her spirit is what I love most." They set the wedding date for April, when the harsh winter would have passed, but before the busiest season of ranch work began. The engagement announcement in the El Paso newspaper caused quite a stir, though most townspeople had already suspected the direction of their relationship. The banker who had once threatened foreclosure was among the first to offer congratulations, albeit somewhat stiffly. "Murphy's a good man," he told Zoe when they encountered him in town. "Smart investment on your part." Zoe merely smiled, not bothering to explain that what existed between her and Thorn had nothing to do with investments or business arrangements anymore. Those who understood love would understand. Those who didn't never would. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with preparations. Martha insisted on sewing Zoe's wedding dress herself, a labor of love that consumed her evenings by lamplight. Thorn, meanwhile, surprised Zoe by beginning construction on a new wing for the main house at Triple M Ranch. "I thought we'd live at my place since it's bigger," he explained when she questioned him. "But your mother should come with us. The new rooms will give her privacy while keeping her close." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Zoe deeply. "Have I told you today that I love you?" she asked, standing on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Not in the last hour," Thorn replied with a smile. "I was beginning to worry." Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with spring flowers blooming across the desert landscape and a gentle breeze keeping the April heat at bay. The ceremony was held at the small church in El Paso, with nearly the entire town in attendance. Zoe wore her mother's creation, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Thorn waited for her at the altar, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him, even when facing down armed rustlers. But when their eyes met as she walked down the aisle on the arm of her father's oldest friend, his expression transformed into one of such pure adoration that Zoe nearly forgot to breathe. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with deeply personal meaning. When Thorn slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, a rare show of emotion from the usually composed rancher. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared, and Thorn didn't wait for permission to kiss his bride. He gathered Zoe into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that belied the strength in his embrace, sealing their union as the congregation erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward was held at Triple M Ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns strung between the trees. There was music and dancing, plentiful food, and flowing drink as friends and neighbors celebrated with the newlyweds. As evening fell and the party continued around them, Thorn pulled Zoe away from the crowd, leading her to a quiet spot behind the barn where they could see the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arms encircling her from behind as she leaned against his chest. "Completely," Zoe replied, tilting her head back to look up at him. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Thorn said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be standing here with you as my wife, I would have said they were crazy." "Life has a way of surprising us," Zoe mused. "This time last year, I was watching my father waste away, certain I'd lose everything he built." Thorn turned her in his arms to face him. "You didn't lose it, Zoe. You transformed it into something even stronger." His hand cupped her cheek. "Just as you transformed me." Their kiss was interrupted by Martha calling their names, announcing it was time for the bride and groom to say their farewells to the guests. As they walked back toward the celebration, hand in hand, Zoe realized she was no longer the broken woman who had fled the auction in tears 7 months ago. She was stronger now, not despite the hardships she'd faced, but because of them, and because of the man beside her who had seen her strength when she herself had doubted it. The years that followed their wedding brought both joys and challenges to Thorn and Zoe Murphy. Their combined ranching operation prospered, gradually expanding to become one of the most successful in the region. They implemented innovative techniques that other ranchers eventually adopted, earning respect throughout the territory. Martha lived happily in the wing Thorn had built for her, enjoying her role as the ranch matriarch and, 18 months after the wedding, as grandmother to Thomas William Murphy, a robust boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. When their daughter Elizabeth Martha arrived 2 years later, followed by twin boys James and Robert the following year, the Murphy household became a bustling center of family life, something neither Zoe nor Thorn had dared to hope for in their darkest days. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thorn surprised Zoe by taking her back to the mesa where he had proposed. They left the children with Martha and rode up at sunset, a picnic basket secured to Thorn's saddle. 5 years, Zoe marveled as they spread a blanket on the ground and watched the setting sun paint the landscape in gold and crimson. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was sitting in that saloon, thinking my life was over. And sometimes it feels like I've loved you forever," Thorn replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine from a bottle he'd been saving for the occasion. "Like my life didn't truly begin until that day." Zoe leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Do you remember what you said to me that day? Sit with me." "Best words I ever spoke," Thorn said, kissing the top of her head, "though I love you and I do rank pretty highly as well." As they watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Zoe reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From despair to hope, from partnership to love, from 2 broken people to a family made whole through their union. The road hadn't always been smooth. They'd weathered droughts and floods, illness and injury, arguments and reconciliations, but they had faced each challenge together, emerging stronger for it. "What are you thinking about?" Thorn asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "About how sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," Zoe replied. "If I hadn't been at that auction, if I hadn't been crying in that saloon, I'd have found you anyway," Thorn said with quiet certainty. "Some things are meant to be, Zoe Murphy." As they rode back to their home in the moonlight, Zoe knew he was right. Their love story had begun in an unexpected moment of kindness, a seat offered, a listening ear extended, but it had flourished, because they had both been brave enough to reach for happiness even after life had taught them to expect disappointment. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and their ranch prospered, as El Paso transformed from frontier town to thriving city, Zoe and Thorn Murphy remained each other's steadfast partners, their love deepening with each passing season. The tears shed at that long-ago auction had indeed led to joy beyond measure, proving that even in the hardest moments, hope was never truly lost. Sometimes it was just waiting at the next table, ready to offer a seat and a chance at a new beginning.